possible, we will, thank you, a series of these briefing sessions as a follow-up to our presentation at the last briefing session on the 28th to make sure that we can answer questions, do a deep dive. And so with that, I want to turn it over to Dr. Hinder. I would encourage everyone again to make sure to put your questions in the chat room. And she'll also be taking a pause to recognize after each section and break and major presentation to entertain any questions as well. So with that, Dr. Hinder, we will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I am getting a message that I cannot start screen share. All right.
There you go.
Sorry, this bar blocks the top of my screen. Does anyone know how to get rid of the bar across the top of the screen? I'm trying to start my slideshow, but
just go to the bottom. Actually, there's usually a
yeah, there's a little thing on the bottom that looks like a screen next to your, yeah, try that. Nope, over to the right, no, keep going. No, to the right.
Yeah.
There, yeah.
Yeah, right there.
Right.
That
thank you. Zoom always throws me off. I'm used to Teams. Anyway, thanks everyone for joining this morning. So as you may know, this year we had several new elements to the evaluation. I have those highlighted in blue. I will try to call those out as we go through the presentation so you're aware of what's been added this year. And I'm going to try to focus on hitting those highlights that are of interest this morning. So first we'll start with early literacy readiness. And we call it this instead of kindergarten readiness this year because Cincinnati Public Schools administered a new assessment. This year was the Acadians Reading Assessment, formerly known as Dibbles Next. And this year that focus was on early literacy. As I mentioned, it's not a kindergarten readiness assessment, and there's no correlation between the Acadians reading and the KRA. So we can't, for instance, present trend information from the last 2 years to this year. But what we can say is that similar to the past couple of years, CPP students also outperformed non-CPP students on this measure as well. So this is a look at the demographics of the CPP-TA cohort versus the non-CPP cohort. Pretty similar. The CPP cohort has a higher percentage of Black students, and the non-CPP cohort has a bit of a higher percentage of children who live in SES4 neighborhoods. So here we're just going to take a look at the overall reading performance on Acadians. Here we can see that CPP students perform slightly higher than non-CPP students. So they're about 51.4% of CPP students were at or above the benchmark compared to 50.1% of non-CPP students. And here we take a look at the Acadians reading by race. Here we also saw some pretty strong differences. 9.5% difference among Black students, 8.2 amongst Hispanic, and 15.1 amongst multiracial or other identifying students. And again, this is always the percentage of students who are at or above that benchmark. Want to talk about SES quartiles before we look at that data. So this is a method that uses measures from the American Community Survey to rank neighborhoods in terms of different risk factors. You'll still see them listed. Some of them are median family income, SNAP eligibility, percent of families headed by a single parent. What's important to remember here is that the quartiles are based on those neighborhood characteristics. So they should not be attributed to the individuals who live in that neighborhood. But this is just one way of trying to approach SES and those differences. All right, so here we take a look at those differences by SES. And I think the most notable finding comes in SES1, which are the kids that have the most need. There is a 23.4% percentage difference, which I think is definitely statistically significant of the kids in this area who are performing better because they went to CPP, tuition assistance preschool. We also looked at performance by preschool attendance. And here we're showing results broken down by the 90% barrier. So those who attended 90% and more days and those who attended less. And again, we see a difference that the more days you can go to high quality preschool really makes an impact on your performance later on. So 58.3% versus 47.2%. We did also take a look at some other preschool attendance rates. So we looked at 95%, we looked at 80%. At 95%, which would be, I guess, about 9 days that they would have missed. The sample size just got so small, we didn't think we could report it, but we definitely did see a stronger difference. But again, we will continue to look at this, and if we have the numbers to support reporting that next year, we will. Here we're taking a look at Acadiant's reading difference by pandemic site status. And just a note about what pandemic sites mean. That means that the provider was approved by ODJFS for pandemic license. Anytime in that time period where they were allowed to be open to service kids, when their parents were first responders or essential workers. And so we see that the preschoolers who attended these sites, this is a proxy for more days attendance, more continuous learning year round. They were at above the benchmark 56.8% of the time versus those who did not attend a pandemic site. And that rate was 42.9. So that's a difference of 14.1 here. Next, we want to take a look at preschool progress. This is a new deliverable this year. We really wanted to understand what progress the children were making when they were in the high quality preschools. We already kind of understand what's going on in kindergarten. This year, we looked at two measures, the ELS and the TS Gold. These were chosen because they're really highly available amongst many TA providers. Those who attended CPS, Head Start providers use these measures. They also have many similar domains that we looked at, such as literacy, mathematics, social-emotional learning, and physical well-being. So what we did is took a look at these measures to evaluate any progress that these preschoolers made from their fall assessment to their spring assessment. And here we are reporting some scores from 2019-20, and we are reporting it this year because those data weren't available for last year's report. So we can see that preschoolers made progress in 4 domains in 19-20, socio-emotional learning being the highest at 88.7. They also made progress in physical, language, and literacy, and math performance as well. So taking a look at the scores for 2021, we also see that preschoolers made progress in 4 domains this year. Those are physical, language, and literacy, social, emotional, and math. All right, so on to tuition assistance. First, we're taking a look at the provider network. So The provider network continued to grow every year from the inception. This year, topping out at 114 providers. This really is just a credit to the CPP staff to continue working with the community and providers. Even though COVID was a factor, closing many providers kept that network progressing. Also want to take a look at preschool enrollment. So there was a slight decrease this year, about 9.4% from last year to this year. And then we know there was also a decrease from 18-19 to 2020. If we contrast that to the momentum that CPP was showing in those non-COVID years, you can see that CPP had increased 52.9% from 17-18 to 18-19. So I think, there's no reason to believe that as things continue to return to normal, that growth will continue. And then another note here, nationwide, some providers are seeing decreases in their enrollment of up to 50%. Even here locally, when we talk to some providers, some of the non-CPP network providers, they described a range between 36% up to 60% of a decrease in enrollment. So again, the CPP staff really working hard to continue enrolling children into this program. Here we take a look at the Quality Improvement Provider Network. There are 119 quality improvement providers as of the end of the fiscal year, just a bit lower than last year, but again, still higher than the last non-COVID year, 2018 to 19, which I think continues to demonstrate network growth. And here we want to take a look at Step Up to Quality movement within the quality improvement providers. So in 2021, 30 providers were converted from quality improvement to tuition assistance. And that is a 36% increase from the previous academic year. So now I want to talk about the extended learning session. We had a cohort of 360 children who were enrolled in the program this past year. And then the sample that we're looking at to understand their performance differences is 92 of those CPP children. So those are participants who continued year round, who participated in that session and went year round, compared to 571 children who did not experience that ELS participation. So overall, we see those children who did participate in ELS with that more continuous education, 56.5% of them were above the literacy benchmark compared to 50.6% who did not have that continuous participation. Then when we take a look at the differences by race, again, we're seeing some significant differences amongst Black students. It's an 8.2% difference. The sample was too small to look at the differences in the white population, but Hispanic and those identifying as multiracial and other also showed differences in achievement based on their participation in ELS. And then we see the same trends for SES as well. All 4 SES groups differed, if they attended ELS or not. Looks like the most significant difference, as we've been seeing with many of these measures, is in the SES 1 and 2, where you have 8.5 and an 8.3% difference. So here I just want to talk a little bit about stakeholder impact, the community stakeholder impact. On the left, you can see the percent of parents, teachers, and providers who responded that they were satisfied or very satisfied with CPP communication. We looked at different modes of communication, and you'll just see some very strong results and responses of satisfaction amongst the modalities: in person, email, phone, and receiving information via newsletters and flyers. You know, the community, the stakeholders are very satisfied with what CPP is doing. And then when you look at parent satisfaction, again, community parents, for different aspects of their TA experience, whether it's the amount of options that they have to send their kids to school, the tuition assistance, the amount, the way they are receiving that assistance, the ease of the application process, and also the communication from their providers. Again, you see very, very high satisfactory standards there. So want to just make a brief note again about CPP strengths and supports during COVID-19. I mentioned some of what is going on nationwide. CPP was very responsive locally to address many of the issues. One, by creating that extended learning session for preschoolers to try to stem some of that learning loss caused by the disruption. The second point we heard a lot about from the providers, they were really appreciative of this. CPP offered resources and support to providers in helping them apply for various types of government grant and aid. You know, many of the providers, again, were able to provide care during the pandemic. Trainings were offered online to providers so they can continue with their step up to quality improvement. And also CPP formed partnerships and provided some protective equipment to providers. So looking forward, we framed our recommendations in kind of two ways. These first set of recommendations are more about evaluating the data and looking for ways that CPP should continue to improve their operations. They should inform and engage those prospective parents. Those are those parents of unenrolled preschoolers, as well engage and connect with those providers who are in the footprint, who are not currently in the network. Assist providers with preschool enrollment challenges. We reported on some of those barriers in our report, and also continue to reach those TA eligible preschoolers. Many parents, I would say less this year, but some parents are still really surprised that they qualified for CPP. So just continuing to encourage broad application to the program. And these are some recommendations that fall more under the program and policy considerations, you know, supporting providers during uncertainty. We heard that was really meant a lot to the community. Considering kindergarten readiness to include the whole child, you know, and I think we started to look at more of those measures this year, that social emotional development, some of that physical development, knowing that it's not just academic readiness, but that the whole child has to be prepared to participate in kindergarten. Extending learning to prevent learning loss. While we've seen some outcomes already showing differences in performance when those kids continue to stay in classrooms and get instruction. Advocate for increases in teacher wages. You know, we did include a wage study that showed that, you know, $15 was a pretty significant standard. CPP has some wage initiatives in place to address that retention and recruitment of teachers. And then also just to consider expansion of tuition assistance beyond the city boundaries. When we looked at some address changes between where families were in preschool and where they ended up when they attended kindergarten, you know, sometimes these families might have moved less than a mile just across the border. And we've seen a fair bit of mobility. So even if we try to reach some of those kids who might be just outside the border, a lot of times they may end up coming back in and attending CPS school later on. All right, so what questions do we have?
Well, my first question would be on extending the borders, you know, this is taxpayer dollars. Cincinnati taxpayers provide this. And so we got to stay within. I know that's very attractive, but I think that would be, you can't do it. I don't see how we can do it. If they're not living in Cincinnati, they can't be in the program, because then how do you discriminate? It's 1 mile, 2 miles, 5 miles. Someone else says, hey, we're on the border as well. So I think that's a very tricky situation because these are tax dollars.
Certainly, I understand that. If for instance, you did want to look at percentages of, percent mobility within certain radius, we could do that, but I totally understand your perspective. It was just something we noticed and something we wanted to bring to you to consider.
No, I think that's important, but I think the first criticism we would get if we went down that road is that people would say, wait a minute, you've not enrolled enough of the kids already in Cincinnati. Why are you going to spend time, money, and effort outside the boundary when you haven't done a very good job? Some people may say that in terms of getting as many kids enrolled in preschool. We don't need to have that conversation. I think we're all working hard.
And if I could say something to piggyback on that too, the boundaries of CPS do extend outside the city. So there are some municipalities that are not within Cincinnati proper, but are part of CPS who I would believe would be eligible for preschool promise since the taxing entity is CPS. So for an example, Cheviot and Gulf Manor, some, it kind of dips in and out of Springfield Township a little bit as well. Amberley, well, Amberley is Amberley, but those other smaller, Green Township has some places. So, we have some opportunities there.
Right.
It would work, but if it's beyond anything that's outside of CPS district itself, I think we're on a slippery slope. I agree with Dr. Owens.
Yeah, I agree. Those areas pay a tax, and people in Amberley pay a city tax. They pay money to Cincinnati. You're right. Those areas would be possibly eligible.
We pay, I live in Delhi with city schools, and I pay the Delhi tax, but I also have a city schools tax, but everybody does. And that's what we're living off of in CPS. But at first I thought you were asking if we could provide to providers outside of the district. And that's something I think that could be, the provider itself is physically outside of the district.
Well, that's another idea too. I don't know what you all think about that idea. Would that be more tenable than thinking about the families outside of the district, or would we run into the same issue?
Because go ahead. I was going to say, I think it'll be more tenable because the children still live in the district, but they happen to be going to a provider that is outside of the district. That would be the only thing. I don't think that we could get that in the MO. I just feel like that's a sticking point, but that would be the only, but because funding children who do not live in CPS, even only over the border, though it might help us in the long run, I don't think that is a wrong.
I get a little concerned when we step outside the boundaries, especially since we still have work to do within our boundaries. I think Laura's right. That's probably an easier sell, but not by much, because we still have a lot of work to do with the providers that are within our boundaries, especially when we're having conversations about providers not having a high enough enrollment. And if we are, those centers are within our boundaries now, we owe it to them to help shore them up first. So
that makes a lot of sense. Absolutely.
Laura, I noticed that you had entered 2 questions in the chat. Would you like to go ahead and address those?
You're on mute, Laura.
Let me look at what they were. I don't know if
your first question was, when you look at comparable children, do you make sure they have not had preschool or not just CPP? And your second question was, is ELS also the ELA learning assessment?
So the first question, talking about that non-CPP cohort. So those kids, we just know that they don't have any CPS preschool experience and that they don't have any CPP preschool experience. Okay. It's possible that they've had other experiences. In years past, I think maybe 2 years ago, we were also able to exclude Head Start from that non-cohort as well. We didn't have that data this year. So that's that.
Yeah, and most of your Head Starts are either in our schools
Right,
or they're CAA and they're already being
Right.
serviced through CPP. So I don't think that that's a
it wouldn't have
necessary
helped a
thing.
lot, right?
Right. It's another thing to put on that, not EMIS, but the codes in Power School that I
Mhm.
think would be very easy to do. But is the ELS the same thing as the,
It's, so yeah, the ELS is looking at the Acadians reading performance.
you're right,
Not
which
the
is,
yeah,
yeah, and it's not new. We've been doing dibbles in kindergarten since Christ was a corporal, but so it's not new, but yeah, but are we asking that all of our providers, if they aren't doing TS Gold, do the ELA for your data?
Are you talking about?
Can you ask me
preschool
that
progress?
again?
So the early learning assessment,
Yes,
I noticed we're using that data because it goes through all this. So if they are not using TS Gold,
so we looked at, we gathered TS Gold and ELA data and we combined them since the domains are so similar. And so are you asking outside of those two assessments, are we looking at other, okay, sorry.
no, I'm asking if a site does not use TS Gold, are we asking them to use the ELA so that you have the data?
No, the ELA is from CPS, so our CPS affiliated.
Yeah, I can answer this question.
Yeah.
So if they're not using one of those two measures, they can use another measure. Essentially, any preschool measure, we can convert to a progress score. So if they're using, I know some sites are still using the Bracken. We will take any of those measures and we can convert it to a progress score. So next year we will approach other preschools and we'll get any type of measurement that they have.
Okay.
And we'll include them in the database.
Because both in my opinion, after having taught for so long, both the TS Gold and the ELA can be kind of subjective.
Yeah.
To an extent, there isn't but then preschoolers aren't meant to be told, okay, pick, a test like an answer test. So, you have to give and take there. So my biggest question about Ks are how many Ks did you use that were CPP? So in the data from the Acadians, how many students were in K that came from CPP?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know we always analyze that data as one large cohort, the combined CPP and CPS. I'm not sure.
Right. I'm just,
the percentage.
Right. I am looking for the private provider for that in the year 2021, what was assessed as a kindergartner. And in the year 1920, they were what we call in CPS, a P4 in a private CPP provider. I wanted to know how many, the numbers. So I wanted to see if we serviced, let's say, 1,000 P4s in 1920, but when we went to assess them in kindergarten in 2021, we only got 500. My question would be, why did they not come to CPS? Why? That is where where did they fall off? Did they go to charter? What? And I know it's hard to find that data, and don't get me wrong, but I think that as a fiscal agent, we have to really look at that.
Yeah, I can provide that number in just a few minutes. I just need some time to pull that output out real quick.
So is your question, Laura, of the kindergarten eligible kids, how many of them go to CPS? Is that your question?
Sorry, in this year, I live in a very loud, I have animals outside and
Yeah, I'm sorry.
airplanes
Of
go
the
over,
kindergarten,
right in the north-south
Yeah.
airplane
Of the-
line.
yeah, of the kindergarten eligible kids that we serve, how many of them end up going to CPS?
Yes, so a P4 and then the next year a K. How many of them do we keep 75%? Do we keep
Yeah.
20%?
Yeah,
That's what
I
I'm,
understand.
that's a piece of data that I'm very interested in.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
Yeah, we can get that for you for sure.
Okay, I'm full of questions. I noticed, and I know that Marcia asked this question when we first, and I'm right by the railroad track, so I'm sorry. We noticed that the improvements, though we made lots of improvements, math was the lowest. Would you suggest, or is this for another one of these analysis, that be a focus for preschool teachers in this coming school year because of the lower math?
I defer to Kalana to answer that.
Well, I would say, first of all, the first math score was pretty significantly lower, right? But then our sample size was very low this year. And if we look at the changes to the next year where we had a larger sample size, that math score did improve. So that 29 to 58, which is closer to being more in line with some of the other improvements. So it may just be, the way that sample was cut the first year. Math was four of the 6 or 7 domains saw progress, right? So there are some other domains where we didn't see a lot of progress. Math was one of them we did. So, I think you could make the argument either way, but this is probably a more realistic look at what's actually going on at math compared to some of those other domains.
Yeah, because I'm looking at it as a teacher. What do I need to do with my children to make them and achieve more? What kind of, are they, is it number sense? That's the data that as a teacher that would support us.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. I mean, if we look at the gap between, so for example, language and literacy and math, that's what, 22 points. So yeah, if you wanted to get that on par, math could be a focus.
And I think that will be a topic of discussion when we present to the providers. And we will also be asking them for feedback and what additional supports they may need to address this and what their perspective is on this as well. Because I think it is important to have that feedback before we sort of kind of initiate and decide for solving what their perspective is on that and what the needs may be going forward.
Completely, I totally agree. And I that's data that I feel that the workforce really needs so that they know where to focus any supports for the community.
Yeah, I would agree. And if you think about it, I mean, what have we been talking about for the last 5 to 10 years? Literacy, literacy, literacy. We don't talk much about math. And I think that's one of the reasons why we are not seeing the kind of changes in math that we see in some of the other categories.
All right, we also had a question from Terry England. Would you like to go ahead?
Yes. Okay, when you said that you looked at the tuition assisted providers who were pandemic licensed, did you also look at those centers who were TA that were not open but provided non-traditional supports for the children, like visiting the teachers going individually to the houses to sit in the driveway and do activities with those children? Or we did Zoom activities with the children just to keep them engaged and the parents engaged as well. So there were meetings going on, there were activities going on. Did you look at some of those? Because some of those centers could not be open because their staff were older and they were compromised. So I think that may have kind of cut out a large group of providers that were doing what they could do for those children.
Right, absolutely. We did not look at that specifically, and we do know that many providers were doing all they could. We had to kind of pick a measure that we could apply consistently across all the provider groups, but that's definitely something to take into consideration when looking at these differences.
Yeah, because those children were still getting that input, but just not in a group situation. But unless they were on a Zoom and they could see their friends as well.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I think this, looking at the measurement this way is about that in-class learning, versus other methods. But that's certainly something to take into consideration.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And I think we'll have some methods to look at that going forward as we look more at the CPP plus alternatives. We really are trying to hone in on how we do outside of traditional classroom supports and education initiatives that are provided and how we measure that. Right now, it's still kind of, how do you say, squishy for us, because we're measuring the dosage and the methodology and how we do that. But I think we will sharpen up as we move forward in measuring those. Those are very boxed, right? With like ABC mouse and those other things. So something like you're describing, Ms. Terry, that's a little bit more free form. We would welcome your input, and the data evaluation work group will be looking at, along with the innovations team, how we measure and report that impact.
Okay, great.
I believe that was all of the questions that were entered into the chat. So I will ask at this time, are there any additional questions?
I'd like to answer that one question from Laura. The number of CPP community children was 302 who attended CPS, or that we matched to CPS kindergarten records. The cohorts of preschoolers the prior year for CPPTA was 839. So that's about 36% matched into the CPS kindergarten class the next year.
So you're saying only 36% of our students have gone on to CPS?
Into kindergarten, yes, or at least based on the information we have available. It seems surprising that this is pretty typical with a lot of the matches we've done in the past, and it's no guarantee that they won't end up in CPS down the road, which with other things we've seen, by the time they hit third grade, sometimes they are at CPS. But that's just sort of the complication there, where you have, maybe they're doing kindergarten at private parochial school, something like that, and then we don't have access to that information.
Right. Only CPS does the KRA. No, that's just been something that concerns me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I understand.
And the only other thing I would say too is, and we have looked at matriculation data, and it can go up much higher by the time that the kids are even in first or second grade, is the cadence is taken in the first 30 to 45 days of school. So these are kids who are registered in CPS within that time period.
And Peter, those are P3s and P4s, the 839? Or just the
yeah, that's P3s and P4s. So yeah, I should probably break that up a bit.
Yeah, can you break that up to P4s?
Yes. And this is why I shouldn't do
that could
things
be a
too
huge
fast.
difference then.
Yes, that's a big difference.
Yeah, we look at P4s. We can get that data to you, Laura. Yeah, if we look at P4s, that number will go up as well.
I have a question. Do any of our providers also provide any kindergarten at their sites? I don't know.
Yeah, some of them may.
Yes, because we do have parochial schools,
Mm-hmm.
right?
It's true.
Okay, so that may factor in as well.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. I know my daughter did kindergarten in her preschool.
Right.
And we can pull we normally track who does after school care and other care. We'll also get a number of the number of high quality providers that also do kindergarten as well. So we'll be able to gauge that.
Yeah, I know centers who are receiving ODE funds usually have a kindergarten as well. So we can look at those as well.
Yeah, so maybe.
I was gonna say,
Go ahead, Laura.
In all my experience of all these centers, where I agree with you, because there were times that we did, I haven't seen in a long time, other than parochial schools, many of our ODE sites that have a K as well. I mean, there aren't very many private providers, if they aren't parochial, that have a K.
What about the learning tree? Not the learning tree. Oh my goodness, it's too early. Burning Grove. Mhm.
No, they
Yeah,
don't
in
do
Kennedy
K.
Heights. Yeah, they don't.
No, the only ones, like, I know that, what is it called? What is Kennedy Heights Montessori?
Mhm.
They have K. Parochial schools have K.
Right.
Any of your Montessoris would have a K with them.
Okay.
The Hebrew day schools, those would have it. But I'm just thinking of the childcare centers that I've dealt with, or there's
Yeah,
not,
the community providers.
yeah,
Yeah.
the community providers.
Yeah, not too many. I know I was asked to, if we could do it, but the whole transition was just too much for one person, and I didn't have that sort of team.
And yeah, because I did that that was my second job, was the kindergarten director for all of his sites. And yeah,
And we're seeing a lot of our, well, I won't say a lot, but a few of our parochial schools are having to make choices in their early childhood education environment, in that they're having staffing either for pre-K or K. And so some of them have chosen this year to go one way or the other based on the funding source and teacher availability and the students they have. So I think we will get some real-time information on that, because I know I've talked to at least 2 parochial schools one chose to keep their preschool open, one chose to not have a preschool classroom this year and have a kindergarten classroom. So we'll get up to that.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, it'd be good to track matriculation to CPS, not only in kindergarten, but also in first grade and beyond, because that's really going to be the true measure of how many kids are ending up in CPS because of various factors.
Right.
Well, I think if anyone has additional questions, we'll just do a wrap up to say that we will be doing 3 additional sessions to talk about each section of the evaluation, the qualitative piece, as well as the teacher wage piece, and then reach and access. I thank you all for joining us today, and always a special thank you to the innovations team for all of the hard work you did with the evaluation and making yourselves available for this discussion. A few reminders and updates for our board members. We will be having a joint meeting with CPS on October 26th. It will be in person at the United Way. You will get information in your Board of Managers update today. You will also get the link today for the ED evaluation. So I hope we had a good morning as we start to evaluate and do that as well. You'll see an update in there as well of the positive decision we got on October 4th on disbursement of the $161 million by the state of Ohio for childcare and preschools, and a breakdown of what that will look like as well. Tonight, we will be doing a comparable presentation to the CPS board and sharing our annual report with them as well. So a snapshot of what's coming. Again, if you have ongoing questions, additional questions, please don't hesitate to send those to me via email, send it to any member of the CPP team. We will make sure that they will be answered. All of these sessions will be posted on the board portal so that you have access as well. And we look forward to the next session.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Wednesday.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.